Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at purposely.com.
What do God's name, treaties, and trees have in common? Let's find out today. Hey, it's Jen, and welcome back to the Bible for Busy People, where we've been studying out the names of God last week, and we're going to do so again this week, just to get to know God better and understand his character. And I found it pretty fascinating to kind of dive into these Hebrew names and what they mean and who gave them to God and all of these things. So hopefully you've been finding it interesting too. Today we're back in Genesis chapter 20. And we're going to start there with just an overview, and we'll be reading Genesis chapter 21. We're talking about Abraham again. At this point, God has led Abraham and Sarah and their household to the region Gerar, just south of Canaan, which is the Promised Land. Abimelech was the one who ruled Gerar, and as king, he sent for Sarah to be part of his household. At the time, Abraham had said that Sarah was his sister, and there's this whole brother-sister mess that ended in Abimelech seeing the power of God who went with Abraham. It's kind of detailed. You can go back and read it later, but that's what happens at the beginning, and they end up settling in Gerar for a time. Next, Sarah becomes pregnant, and she gives birth to Isaac, which we've already talked about last week quite a bit. Hagar and Ishmael, who is Abraham's son by Hagar, they're sent away, but God meets them and cares for them in the desert. And as we talked about last week, Hagar had called God El Roi, the God who sees me. All right, now we're in Genesis 21, and that's the part that we're going to pick up at today. I'm reading in the Christian Standard Bible, and I'm starting in verse 22. It says, "At that time, Abimelech, accompanied by Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, 'God is with you in everything you do. Swear to me, by God, here and now, that you will not break an agreement with me or with my children and descendants. As I have been loyal to you, so you will be loyal to me and to the country where you are a resident alien.' And Abraham said, 'I swear it.' But Abraham complained to Abimelech because of the well that Abimelech's servants had seized. Abimelech replied, 'I don't know who did this thing. You didn't report anything to me, so I hadn't heard anything about it until today.' Abraham took flocks and herds and gave them to Abimelech, and the two of them made a covenant. Abraham separated 7 ewe lambs from the flock, and Abimelech said to Abraham, 'Why have you separated these 7 ewe lambs?' He replied, 'You are to accept the 7 ewe lambs from me, so that this act will serve as my witness that I dug this well.' Therefore, that place was called Beersheba, because it was there that the two of them swore an oath. After they had made a covenant at Beersheba, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, left and turned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there he called on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham lived as an alien in the land of the Philistines for many days." So all of that said, it sounds like a lot of treaties, a lot of things going on, but we are going to focus on verse 33, the tamarisk tree, and the name El-Olam, the everlasting God. This was another way of honoring God and how he had provided for Abraham and his family. Think about it. He had brought Abraham and his family to this new place. He had protected Sarah from a bad situation with Abimelech, and they ended up being able to settle down in Gerar. And God provided Abraham with what he had promised, a son, an heir, and their household is all there together. He also had provided safety for them through this treaty that he had with Abimelech, who is the ruler of Gerar. There's some interesting things to know about the tamarisk tree. First of all, it's slow growing and can live up to 100 years. Abraham planted this thinking of future generations to come. And we already know that God had promised him many future generations. He promised him a whole nation that would come just from him through his son Isaac. So we know that he's thinking ahead. This tree, the tamarisk tree, can also withstand brutal conditions because it has deep roots that go out to find water underground. And it can also survive fires, just devastating situations. It can live in the desert, live in the wasteland. It also symbolizes eternal life and God's faithfulness. It's an evergreen tree. Here's something else about it that I found fascinating. It produces a sweet, honey-like substance, otherwise called honeydew, on its leaves that is sometimes called, wait for it, manna. Just like the manna God would send the Israelites to eat 400 years later as they're walking around that same desert, having left slavery in Egypt and going on their way to the Promised Land. It's also called a salt cedar. Salt crystals form on the leaves and absorb water at night when it's cool. And then in the heat of the day, the droplets release this cooling mist, almost like a built-in air conditioning. And it's all this just crazy foreshadowing of what's to come, right? The Israelites wandering around in Egypt, wandering around in the wasteland, being reminded of God's faithfulness, of his eternal life, seeing this desert that can withstand brutal conditions, experiencing that this plant produces manna and produces its own kind of air conditioning. It's just crazy to think that maybe 400 years later, Abraham's same family line would see a tree like this as they were on their way to the Promised Land. And fun fact, here in the United States, tamarisks are considered to be a pest, and they're trying to get rid of them. But that's a side note, and it doesn't really have anything to do with our story. This tree represents so much more than a treaty. It represents God's enduring faithfulness and eternal quality. God was with Abraham in the desert. He was with Abraham before he had a son and after. He was following through on his promises, even through the generations of Abraham's family, all the way down the line to the Israelites wandering in the desert who would see trees like this, maybe not realizing that their ancestor had planted them, I don't know, but seeing a sign of God's faithfulness on the way to the Promised Land. So today, as you notice the trees around you, let them remind you of El-Olam's enduring faithfulness and everlasting nature. Think about what you are building for future generations as you explore your faith, as you connect with God, and as you study the Bible like this, even as a busy person. Have a great day today. I will talk to you again tomorrow.
Thank you for listening to The Bible for Busy People. If you need prayer or want to go deeper in your faith, visit our show notes. Will you take a moment to share with a friend and leave a review? It helps the Bible get into even more people's minds and hearts. Find more podcasts that will recharge you at purposely.com.